Hi, my name is Dean Olson, and I'd like to share with you what happened to me within my experience of faith. And one of the images that comes to me that expresses it pretty clearly to me is, have you ever felt like you've been on the outside looking in? When I became a teenager, the faith that I had as a young person just went away. And I ached over that, but it was gone, and nothing came to replace it. And the feeling I had for years after that was like being on the outside, looking through plate glass at people inside, enjoying themselves, having fun, belonging, and being together. And I no longer was a part of them. What I want to share with you is how that all radically changed years later, and what brought it about, and where I see myself now. I had an overactive imagination when I was a child. I grew up in Chicago, and it was in a working class Irish community, Roman Catholic. At the corner was the Catholic Church St. Gabriel's, and they had a huge bronze statue of Gabriel blowing his horn. I also lived near the Chicago stockyards that still was active back then. And at the changing of shifts, they'd blow a huge whistle. And I remember laying in bed one night and hearing that whistle blowing and thinking, oh, the world is coming to an end. Gabriel is blowing his horn. And now I'm going to have to go in front of God, and God's going to open his book and read out all the bad things I've done. And my mom and dad will know the bad things I've done. That was then. And years later, all that evaporated away. And ironically, it was going from high school to college. I was Lutheran, grew up Lutheran, and I went to a Lutheran school, Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois. And the very first semester in what was called Old Testament back then, now they refer to it as Hebrew Scripture. It's less pejorative. The class was taught, and in teaching the class, my faith just literally fell away. Everything collapsed. The experience in working with the Old Testament as they did then, they refer to it as historical critical method. But to me, I refer to it like a pathologist table taking apart a dead body. The scripture was taken apart, and it no longer carried the same kind of meaning. And that was in my freshman year at a religious school, and it didn't get any better as the 4 years went on. Most people say they go to seminary because they get a call. I didn't get a call, but I had a lot of questions. That's why I went to seminary, because I figured, if I couldn't get an answer in the college, maybe I'll get it in the seminary. And I went to the Lutheran seminary that had just opened on the University of Chicago campus in the middle both of the Vietnam War and of civil rights going on, and all that was happening out on the streets. It didn't change there. It even got worse. I'd say when I graduated from seminary, I was a converted humanist. And I was ordained to go into the Lutheran Church and expected by a congregation to be their spiritual leader and represent the faith. And I was scared to death. Well, I survived there for 12 years and finally realized this isn't working out. And I left parish ministry, and I moved out here to California, where I've been living off and on for the last 25, 30 years. And I came here because of a group in the Bay Area called the Guild for Psychological Studies. I didn't come here for the Guild, and I didn't come here for psychology, but they have a retreat center out in the Sonoma Valley area where they studied what they refer to as the records of the life and teachings of Jesus. They're taking the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and they're working with them in a very specific way. And the way they worked with them, I was introduced to by a man that traveled on the road and led Bible studies, a man by the name of Walter Wink. He originally was with Union Seminary in New York, but he lost his position there because of a little book he wrote called The Bible and Human Transformation. And he said it was like Luther nailing the 95 Theses to the door of his church, because he said, I, as a professor, came out and said the historical critical method's bankrupt. It can't deliver what it promises. It could tear apart the text, but it can't breathe new life into it. And I realized something else needs to happen if Scripture is going to take on new meaning for me. And he found it through the Guild, their way of working with Scripture, a question approach, a way of working with Scripture where you're with a group of other people that are also interested in giving time and energy to it, to meet for a period of time, to work with the Gospels, and to live in an environment where you're following rituals like silence during the day, like moving at nighttime with lanterns in the dark, like meeting in the big lodge and moving to music, not as dance, but allowing your body to just move with the music. And also the huge art room they had, where after we'd work with the text on the life and teachings of Jesus, and what was opening for us, we were invited to go and journal about it, or go to the art room and get some art material and work with an art project, seeking ways to express it further or getting deeper into it. That was my start on a new path, a new way that Scripture began opening up. But the problem was, as they said, the sense of Jesus is opening for you, but what about you? What's opening for you? That really didn't matter to me because Scripture was coming alive, and I figured, hey, that's all I need is the Scripture coming alive. But it wasn't all I needed, and it took me more years to find that out. But that's where I moved on a new journey, being out here. And part of that journey living in the Bay Area was experiencing other faiths. And ironically, the one that struck me was Green Gulch, the Zen community over near Sausalito. A friend took me there one day, and I went to their Sunday morning services, and it really grabbed me. Something was going on there. I didn't know what, but I felt drawn to it. And for the years that I lived there after that, 3 or 4 more years, every free moment I had, I was heading over to Green Gulch, volunteering and participating there because I wanted to get in touch with what this was touching within me. It didn't happen. And it came years later when I met a woman who invited me back out here because I had moved back to Chicago to be with my children for a while. They were having difficulty with their mom, and we were divorced, and I wanted to be with them as they went into high school. And I figured when they got out of high school, I'd move back here. Well, when my daughter graduated, she wanted to go to the Art Institute, and that's a 5-year program. But her mom didn't like it because she didn't want to stay at their dormitory. And I said, well, I'll move downtown with her. And we did. And so beyond high school, I was still living in Chicago 3 years later while she was in school. After those 3 years, I didn't have to live with her anymore because she had other people she related to and friends that she could be with. But I met a person that my sister introduced me to. It just so happened my sister was still living out here in Folsom, and I was in Chicago, and she introduced me to a woman. And that woman and I communicated for 6 months. Neither one of us knew what each other looked like, but we became interested. And then I started talking to her over the phone. And then I invited her to Chicago to spend some time with me. And she came and spent her birthday there with me. Just so happened mine was 2 days later, so I had my birthday then too. And that began a relationship where I was invited by her to come out here in winter times and stay here. And I'd invite her as a preschool teacher who was off in summer to come out and spend time with me in Chicago area. And then finally, I moved back out here. And it was out here we joined this community where we're sitting in right now. This is Sierra Friends Center. It's a Quaker school that was begun 60 years ago. And it was begun by Quakers in the Bay Area that wanted a safe place for their children to experience high school. So they bought this place that at that time was over 300 acres and started a school here. Since then, it's been whittled down to 240 acres because the school, all those 60 years off and on, has been unsustainable. So there had to be ways to raise money. One of those ways was selling off 10-acre lots. And so when you come on the property, you go up Woolman Lane. It's a half-mile from Jones Bar to the campus. And all along there are 10-acre plots with private homes on them. That money went fast, and all through other years they had other ways that they sought to raise money. But they're still in the same experience of finding that it's unsustainable to maintain programs here. Yet they've done it for 60 years. But we came here to participate in the Quaker meeting, and it was mainly because of people that we had met. People who were active in the community, and back then it was the Iraq War during that time, and also with the Afghanistan situation. And there also still were things related to civil rights that were going on. And people in this meeting were very active, even though they were up in their 80s, many of them. And they would invite us to participate. That was the first time I did civil disobedience. We went to Lawrence Livermore Lab, and Russ Jorgensen said, "You want to get arrested today, Dean? Today's a good day to get arrested." I said, "Okay." And so I stood with him and others as the police line told you, "Please move back. If you don't move back, we'll arrest you." And I was arrested for the first time. I did civil disobedience in my life for the first time. And for the last 18 years, I've been active in this meeting. I've said goodbye to many of those early Quakers who have died. And now I'm one of the older members. I'm close to my 70s. I'm 79 now. I'm very fortunate in being part of this meeting because I could be honest here. And I've realized to be able to be honest about what I believe and what I don't believe is important for your own personal health. But it also is an environment where your faith can grow and take on new meaning and purpose. And it has happened here. And an image of that for me is a book I read, Walking by Henry David Thoreau. And I think it was in that book he talked about words, fresh words. And he said it's like pulling a plant out of the ground. And you see the roots just hanging there, dripping with the dirt. That's what a fresh word is like. It's alive. It's alive. And that was very powerful for me because that's what I was starting to experience about my faith and about who Jesus was for me. But it wasn't anything like I had experienced growing up in a traditional Christian community, but that was okay for me. It's what it became and meant for me. But what I really would like to share with you now is where I'm at now at 79, because within the last 2 years, I picked up a book that's radically changed my life and expanded all this. And it was written by a woman named Wall Kimmerer. It's a book called Braiding Sweetgrass. She's Potawatomi, a Native American, a person who both is a traditional person through her native group and also a PhD botanist and biologist, a professor at SUNY University in Upper New York. But in her book, she talks about braiding sweetgrass as a metaphor. And her book is very much like poetry. And that's why I think I like it, because it's alive. It really speaks to you. You really feel her personal sense of what this all means for her, and she allows you to step into the story. But she talks about her faith, and she talks about her school, and she talks about the combination of them. And that's where the braiding sweetgrass comes in, because they take 3 strands, and she says the 3 strands are native tradition, the native people's tradition, and it's modern science is another strand, and then trees and plants. Because for native people, everything is alive. And she, in one of her stories, shares as a little girl laying on the ground, and wild strawberries were growing, and she was talking to the little strawberries and saying, "Oh, I'd love to eat you, but I'm told I need to ask you, may I eat you?" And you have to wait until you get an answer. And if you get a positive answer, you could eat the plant. But you never take the best, and you never take it all. You always leave something. And then you need to show gratitude for what you've received from that plant. And she says, as a little girl, she looked at that wild strawberry and saw these little tentacles going out and followed them and saw that at certain points little roots were going down. So she would clean the ground where those roots were, thinking that would help the roots have a place where they could settle into the ground. And it was her way of expressing her gratitude to the plants for what they had given her as a gift. What was powerful for me in her book was the opening story, one of their stories called Falling Woman. And in that story, it's about an opening in the sky through which light was coming down. And what had happened is the tree of life had collapsed and was falling through. And up in that opening were the people up in that world that lived. And this woman by the name of that was given by the natives of Falling Woman, she was curious and went over to look. She also was pregnant. And as she was looking, she slipped and began to fall and reached out and grabbed branches from the tree of life, and they broke off in her hand as she fell through and was floating down towards the darkness. But down below was all water, and the little animals were looking up because they saw that opening, and then they saw something falling. And the geese said, "It's a person. We need to go up and help them." And the geese flew up and opened their wings and caught her and helped her down. And they set her on the back of Turtle. And when she was there, they realized she's probably not comfortable because this is all water. She's used to ground being around. And some of the animals said, "I know deep down there's ground. I'll go down and try and get some." And one by one, they dove, but none of them could make it down to get any of the mud or earth that was down there. But then there was a little creature who said, "I'm going to try." And they're all laughing and said, "You can't do it, you're too small." But he still dove. And they waited, and they waited, and they waited. And then they saw bubbles coming up, and more bubbles, then no bubbles, and then realized he probably died. And then his body floated to the surface. And one of them said, "Look, his paws are closed. What is he holding?" And they went over and opened his paws, and he was holding mud. And they took the mud from his paws, and they gave it to Falling Woman, who then spread it on the back of Turtle. And it started to spread out over the water. And she took the branches she had of the tree of life and began to shake them around. And plants started to grow up. And that's how the earth came to be. And that's why where we live here, we refer to this place as Turtle Island. That story opened my eyes Because as a human being, a modern person, I could laugh and say, that's a made-up story. But it was more than that. It showed life as how Native people look at life. And it showed me and gave me a new set of eyes or way of looking at life that still are affecting me to this day. And I'm deeply, deeply grateful to Wall Kimmerer's book. In 2 years, I haven't finished her book. I'll read a chapter and I have to live with it a while. I have to write about it. I have to think about it. And then I find myself going back to other chapters. Hopefully one of these days I'll finish the whole book. But it's powerful. And then finding out she's on YouTube and watching her on YouTube. This has not destroyed my faith. I share with people in our meeting what she has allowed me to experience is to see life like Jesus spoke of, through new eyes. Seeing that we're connected to life and that we're not the central part of life. In fact, we were the last created, so we're the youngest, we're the little ones. We have a lot to learn from life. And what we have to learn from life is going to come from life. And it's all here because life has been given to us by the Creator. And the way she shares this in her book is also the way her people experience it and what they do and how she, through her life and other groups, are experiencing it now, especially with big areas that have been destroyed because of what we've done to them through our ways of living. And the main way she's talked about it is you don't bring to it what you think it needs. You spend time and watch what nature's already doing, because nature already is bringing the healing to it. And what we need to do is find ways of serving what nature is already capable of doing. And there's beauty in that to me. And I love and I feel very grateful and blessed to have this opportunity of sharing this with you. And I encourage you, if this touches you, she has that book out. Enjoy it. Braiding Sweetgrass.